Hello everybody. And it's been a week. I wanted to make these videos for this last weekend, but we had stuff happen at the house. Basically, the feed line to our water heater popped off, and we flooded the living room at 5 in the morning. So, and then I've been real busy with the website and all that. My website, markshellyaquatics.com. I'll put a link in the description, so if you're interested, anything you see while I'm talking about this today in this video, then go ahead and check it out. But this video is about my next video in the planted tank success and how to go about having planted tank success the easy way. And so this video is going to cover the very most important part of having a successful planted tank, and that is the light. The number one most important thing is going to be your light. So when you're choosing a light, you need to think about how much effort and time am I going to put into this, how involved do I want it to be, and how hard do I want to make this on myself. So since I have so many tanks to take care of, I always go the low light route, and that limits the choice of plants you're going to grow, and everything will grow much slower, but it makes everything a lot easier to balance. Makes things so much easier to deal with. And if I only had like 1 or 2 tanks, I might try doing a high-tech tank with CO2 injection and all that stuff and a super bright light. But I have found that it just takes time, patience and time, when you use low lights. Like this light here, it's just like a 25-watt strip light, and all I'm growing is moss. Super low light. I always stick to as low light as I can, grow what I'm wanting to grow in a particular tank. So that is what you really need to determine. What kind of plants do I want to grow, and how hard do I want to make this? So basically, your light is going to determine how fast things move. And obviously, the slower things move, the easier it is to manage. And things, when something goes out of whack, it goes out of whack slower and lower light. And higher light, things can get way out of whack. So basically, if you stick with low light, you're going to be limited to the plants you can grow. Which, what I've done, I've kind of determined some easy low light plants that do well in my water, and I plant them in, and I just give them months. I mean, these tanks, all these tanks are years old at this point, and they grow nice and slow and predictable. And every once in a while, when I do a big trim, things will get out of balance, and then we'll have little algae issues pop up. But if this was high light, then you're looking at, say, like I don't even dose fertilizers anymore. That's a whole other ball game. If you get into bright lights, you go bright enough, you're going to need CO2 and fertilizers for sure. So what it is, this comes in the the whole balance thing. That's the key to any planted tank, and the thing that affects that balance more than anything is the light. So a super bright light, you're going to turbo charge it. I remember back in the day playing like the old sim games on the computer and stuff, and you could slow down time or speed up time however fast you want a time to go. If you get a super low light like what I have, that is going to make it super slow mode where the game progresses along at a slow speed. Now if you get a super bright light, it's boom boom, time is flying by, things move so fast, and it's harder to keep on top of things. But you also you can grow about anything you want if you have bright enough light. But once you start getting to that, you're getting to expert levels and that kind of stuff. So what you want to do, if you're starting off, if you're trying to have your very first planted tank, you need to go as low light as possible. That's my suggestion. And plants like Ludwigia, right here. Let's see, we got some mermaid weed. That is that's not really real low light, but it's definitely I gotta put it in tanks that have a little bit more light than others. Like, I don't think mermaid weed would do too good in these tanks with just these little 25 watt lights. So you gotta pick your plant selection according to your light, and before you get started, pick what light you want to grow according to what plants you want to grow and how easy you want to make this on yourself, if that makes any sense. So if you have a super bright light, what's going to happen is your plants are going to grow super fast. And then if you got a bright enough light, your plants are going to want to grow real fast. But if there's a shortage of a nutrient, whether it be CO2, nitrogen, potassium, phosphate, or any of the trace elements, then the plants cannot grow. They need everything. So that's why when we talk about EI dosing fertilizers, what you do, you just dump in a whole bunch of fertilizer every week. So then there's excess nutrients, but if you have enough of every nutrient, the plants are going to grow like crazy, and this is going to involve CO2. CO2 is one of the most important things that these planted tanks need. And so if you get a bright enough light, you got to have CO2, because then the plants cannot keep up with so what's going to happen is the plants are going to try to grow fast under the bright light, and then they're going to run out of nutrients. Like, if you don't have CO2 but you dose fertilizers but you don't inject CO2, the downfall, your shortage is going to be CO2, and then you're going to have pea soup more than likely or uncontrollable hair algae like that. And then you get into more like, some of my higher light tanks are medium light, and in those tanks you want to grow fast growing stem plants if you don't do CO2. But then again, it's all balance. The higher your light, the higher your light, the faster things are going to go, and the harder it is to keep things in balance, and the easier things can get out of whack. So you have I put a great big light on this tank. If I put it would be screwed, because this tank is almost valve. It's all valve. That's another thing that plays a part into it. These are root feeders, and they don't necessarily feed out of the water column. That's that's a whole other story. But if I put a super bright light on here, it would probably turn into pea soup, because this valve will grow fast, but it's sucking all the nutrients down from in the substrate. And I don't put any fertilizers in here, anything. The only fertilizer is pleco poop. The valves like pleco poop. So since I don't fertilize, I am adding fertilizer, but I'm not putting in ferts. The fertilizer I'm adding is the food. When I feed the fish, the algae wafers and the flake food and all that I put in there, the fish eat it, and they process it, poop it out, turns to nitrates, the plants use up the nitrates, and there's phosphates and potassium and all that stuff, all the goodies in the fish food. And if you have a low enough light, that's good enough. That's what you feed the fish. But if you start having algae issues, like I said, I think I said before earlier, if I do it, especially in my pond. And this, I have a really bright light, one really bright light, and it's focused on here in the middle where I'm growing. This is where I farm my mermaid weed, right here. And then I also have Ludwigia and all kinds. I need to clean this side out and do more mermaid weed on this side. But that's what happens is when I cut out a whole bunch of plants in here, I end up getting hair algae in this, in particular in this tank. Now we have other kinds of algae growing too in my other tanks, but that's usually hair algae for me. Every once in a while on newer tanks I'll have them go green when the plants haven't taken hold and things are still trying to balance themselves out. And then I have that bright light. I grow my impatiens up out of the water, so I need a bright light for those, and they will actually flower. But they're not flowering right now because they just got trimmed. So this is my newest tank, and this is something that this tank isn't going, it's going alright, but it's still getting itself worked out. And this is pearlweed, and pearlweed, it does a lot better under highlight. But I'm growing it underneath this little, my go-to light is the cheap Aquaneat ones. I find them on Amazon or eBay from, I think it's like CLL Pet Supplies or something or other. But like, I think a 2.5 foot light is like less than 30 bucks. But as you can see, this is another kind of algae I get in some of my tanks. Staghorn is what this is, and you notice how it's bright red. And I use hydrogen peroxide. When something gets out of balance or I'm having trouble with the tank, and it starts growing algae, so algae don't completely control it or completely take over, I use the hydrogen peroxide to kill it. And hopefully the tank will become balanced. You allow more plant growth, more time for things to be established. The bigger plants grow, the more they grow. So that's part of it. And this tank is, other than this pearlweed that's growing super slow because it's under super low light, are crips, and those are strictly root feeders. So they're not doing a whole lot to suck stuff out of the water column. And so this tank has been a struggle to get in balance, but eventually it will. Eventually it will. It's been getting better. This staghorn is actually a new thing. So see how it's bright red like that, and that's because even though this is super low light, I have some kind of nutrient imbalance causing that particular kind of algae. And like certain kinds of algae will pop up with certain kinds of different nutrient deficiencies. This is another super low light tank. It actually has got a decent amount of light. Green jade shrimp. But you can see here we got crypts, Anubias, more crypts, and little bits of moss here and there. The moss will eventually take over if I let it. And on this one, it's just an old school, like T10, T12, whatever you call them. And then I have two of those, even though this is an old shop light. The shop light quit working. So then I used two of those 25 watt, they call them T5 LED fixtures. They're LED bulbs, they look like T5s. I was talking about my guppy tanks with the moss. I have two of those on there and an old T8 or whatever bulb they call them. Old school fluorescent bulb. And this is just shrimp, and there's a handful of plecos in here. So we don't need a lot of light. Well, for a 75-gallon tank, I don't really put a whole lot of food in here. But it's all about keeping balance, and this tank has been, we got this algae going on here because it's right up here. I got these lights all in the back of the tank, and you can see we get this algae growing. It's like the fuzz algae. I can't think of the name right off the top of my head right now, but stuff that's closer to the light. And then you can see from this angle, the front of the tank is a whole lot less light than the back. And you see how everything's growing towards the back of the tank. I try to keep the front of the tank open. No fertilizers, because again, the only fertilizer is the fish food I put in here. And that's because I keep the light low enough, and I keep plants that are low light, that are happy in low light. And so I have an easy balance to achieve. It's easier to achieve balance when you're dealing with low light and slow growing plants. This is another 75-gallon tank. High grade cherry shrimp. Secure grade / fire red. And lots of plecos. But again, low light, no fertilizers other than the food I put in there. And I do have some Ludwigi in here. It's not real big right now because I just trimmed it back. This is mostly just moss and great big Anubias. So you can make it real easy or you can make it real hard. And with me, I tried doing fertilizers and some higher lights, and to me all I did is trim plants. And I like finding that balance where I'm not always having to get in there and mess with stuff. I like putting it where it is and giving it time to grow. Like I've had these Anubias in here for years and years, for like 3.5 years I've had these Anubias in here, something like that. I don't remember. But it's been a long time. These are great big. I think this Anubias, this one's been in here since I've started the tank. This patch of Anubias. It's just time. That's the easiest way to do it. Now if you go to the highlight, you'll get faster growth. With faster growth, you're going to run into a lot harder to keep track of. What do you say, meow meow? What do you say, meow meow? Ain't that right? It's easier to do low light. and highlight. And if you're a beginner, that's what I recommend. And you want to do, I know everyone, all the rage is a carpet. You got to do a carpet. And people think you got to have Monte Carlo or dwarf baby tears and super bright light, CO2. And as you can see, I got a carpet. I got a carpet and lots of tanks. And it's just moss. This is my pilo moss. You just give it time and it'll spread and spread and spread, but it's not going to happen overnight. And that's the way I like it. Slow and steady wins the race, in my opinion, when it comes to planted tanks. I mean, I'm not saying highlight don't have its place. And that's definitely fun. At one point, I did have CO2 on this tank. It's still right here. There's the CO2 diffuser I was using. It's still sitting there. So once upon a time, I had CO2 and fertilizers and highlight and everything going on this. And with that, I was in here trimming this tank every single week, the stem plants. Especially on a 20 long, Ludwigia and Rotala and stuff like that. It'll go from the bottom to the top in 3 or 4 days. In a couple days if you got enough light and CO2. But then again, unless you're staying on top of that, you got it just dialed in perfect, you're going to have, all you're going to be doing is fighting algae. So, I'm not saying you're not going to run into problems with low light, low tech. But if you're a beginner, you're better off. It's like being skiing. You're on the kiddie trail and not the big scary mountain. Make it easy on yourself. Have a higher chance for success with low light. My suggestion. So remember, think before you get a planted tank, think about your light. Now, the pond light just shut off. Again, that plays another part in it. You've got higher light, so less light time. That's another thing that you gotta play with to balance it out, is how long you leave the lights on. I think the pond light stays on for like 7 hours and all the other ones stay on for 8 or 9. Because if I leave that on the same amount of time, I just fight algae. Because every once in a while I will dose fertilizers in there after I trim it. I think I did last week, because trying to fight that hair algae problem. But meow meow, what are you doing? She don't eat the fish, she just drinks the water. The fish, I think they actually have to avoid from eating the fish when they drink out of here. Anyway, again, make it easy on yourself. Start off with low light, and then once you get that figured out and you understand the whole light and balance, nutrients, photo period, you get into it for a couple years and you get it all figured out, then try something highlight. I've been there, done that several times throughout the years I've been keeping fish, and for me, low light, low tech is my preferred way to go, especially with this many tanks. It's way easier, trust me. Again, if you saw anything you liked, check out my website, markshellyaquatics.com. Thank you guys for watching. Bye.